Imagine a car so ahead of its time, it looked like it rolled out of a sci-fi film. In 1963, it had futuristic suspension, a body built like a safety cage, and an engine bay wide enough to fit a jet turbine. Not kidding, an actual turbine. But while the rest of the world was still figuring out how to bolt doors on straight, one small British company quietly dropped a luxury sedan that could outthink cars decades ahead of it. And then, it vanished. No global send-off, no grand return. Just a quiet fade into the background, forgotten by most, worshipped by a few. But here's the twist. This wasn't a fluke. It was the product of two brilliant minds, a blank sheet of paper, and one audacious goal: to build a car that didn't just match the future, it anticipated it. And once you understand what they did, you'll never look at British engineering the same way again. The story of the Rover P6 doesn't begin with hype. It begins with need. By the late 1950s, Britain was changing. Fast. The new motorway system was expanding, and people weren't just driving to get around. They were driving farther, faster, and expecting more from the cars they owned. The typical British saloon? It just wasn't cutting it anymore. At Rover, two engineers, Spen King and Gordon Bashford, saw this shift coming, and instead of tweaking what already existed, they started from scratch. No templates, no recycled ideas, just a clean sheet of paper. And a bold question: what if we built a car for the roads of tomorrow? Their goal wasn't to make a car that looked impressive on paper. They wanted something that could cruise effortlessly at high speeds, handle like a dream, and protect its passengers in ways other cars couldn't even imagine yet. They studied the best, especially the Citroën DS, and set out to raise the bar, not follow it. The plan was daring. The approach was radical. And the end result? Well, let's just say, when it finally showed up, it didn't blend in. It made the industry stop and stare. Let's take a look at what they built, and why it left everyone talking. It didn't look like much was coming. Just another new British saloon rolling into the 1963 Earl's Court Motor Show. But then, the covers came off, and everything changed. The Rover P6 didn't look like a car of its time. It looked like a car that time had not yet caught up with. Sculpted lines, a long, low stance, a sharp front end with hidden strength underneath. And that body? It wasn't just for looks. It was designed like a safety cell, with detachable body panels bolted onto a rigid base unit. This thing had crumple zones and a strong passenger shell before most manufacturers even thought about safety. Step inside, and it only got better. The dash was padded, the gauges were clear, and the cabin felt purposeful, not flashy, not fussy, just clever, driver-focused design, clean, simple, and comfortable. And yes, that little plastic prism on the front fenders, that was so you could actually see your corners in low light. Under the skin, it got even more interesting. The front suspension was unlike anything else. A bell crank system that let the shock absorbers lay horizontally, improving both ride quality and packaging. At the rear, a split-to-D setup that eliminated sliding splines in the drive shafts, giving smoother power delivery. And here's the part that really shows you where Rover's head was at. The engine bay was deliberately wide enough to fit a gas turbine. That's not an exaggeration. Rover was genuinely working on turbine-powered prototypes. The first model, the Rover 2000, launched with a 2.0-liter engine purpose-built for high-speed cruising. Not a racer, a thinker's car, stable, smooth, and quietly confident. But the best was still to come, because this car, it had just fired its first shot. And what came next turned it into a full-blown performance icon. The Rover 2000 made waves, but Rover wasn't done, not even close. In 1966, they released the 2000 TC, short for Twin Carburetor. It gave the car a bit more punch, 110 horsepower versus the standard 104. Doesn't sound like much today, but But back then, it meant this car wasn't just for comfy cruising anymore. It could hustle. But the real turning point? 1968. 2 years after Rover joined British Leyland, the P6 got a heart transplant. And not just any heart, a V8. Specifically, the 3.5-liter all-aluminum V8 originally designed by Buick, then bought and reworked by Rover. Lightweight, powerful, and built to last, this engine changed the P6's entire personality. The result was the Rover 3500, and it turned the P6 into a different beast entirely. 0 to 60 in 10.5 seconds. Top speed? 114 miles per hour. Not outrageous numbers today, but for a luxury saloon in the late 60s, that was serious business. And the best part? Rover didn't stretch or bloat the car to make it fit. They moved the front suspension crossmember forward, added a lower air intake, and tucked the battery into the trunk. Same shape. More muscle. No compromise. In 1970, the P6 got a facelift, what became known as the Series 2. It looked sharper, had better instruments, and updated interiors, especially in the V8 and TC models. The dials became circular, the switches were rotary, and the whole experience just felt a little more refined. And by 1973, they introduced the 2200 series, boosting the four-cylinder for better emissions compliance. Especially in places like California, the P6 was evolving, faster, cleaner, and more focused. But even as the engineering improved, something else was creeping in. A problem Rover couldn't engineer their way out of. As the P6 gained traction in the UK, Rover set its sights beyond the island. First stop? North America. To crack the US market, Rover introduced a series of specially prepped models known as NADA versions, short for North American Dollar Area. These weren't your standard British saloons. They came with wraparound bumpers, extra hood scoops, wing reflectors, and even an early ice alert system that warned you when the roads might get slippery. Luxury touches like power windows and air conditioning were added too. It had the ingredients, but not the outcome. Despite the tweaks, fewer than 1,500 units sold in 1971, and just like that, Rover's American dream hit a dead end. But the export effort didn't stop there. In New Zealand, the P6 was locally assembled at a plant in Stoke Nelson, alongside other British Leyland products. Over 2,400 units were even exported to Australia, creating a strange case of a British car, built in New Zealand, driving on Aussie roads. And then there were the coach-built curiosities. Rover never officially made a P6 estate, but FLM Panelcraft did. Called the Astura, it was a full-on station wagon conversion, with only around 200 ever built. Most of them were based on the V8-powered 3500, and thanks to their high conversion cost, they're rare finds today. So while the P6 may have struggled to go global in numbers, in spirit, it was everywhere, and evolving in ways no one quite expected. But back home, something darker was taking shape. And it wasn't under the hood, it was inside the factory. For all its brilliance, the P6 had one fatal flaw. It was built at the wrong time. By the mid-1970s, Rover had become part of the chaotic British Leyland Empire, a group of brands stitched together by politics, pride, and problems. And those problems? They showed up on the production line. What started as a world-class machine began suffering from serious quality control issues. Misaligned panels, unreliable engines, failing gearboxes. Cars were rolling out of the factory already begging for repairs. In 1975, the Drive magazine, published by the British Automobile Association, made it official. They awarded a brand new Rover 3500 the dreaded title of Worst New Car in England. That single car went through 3 engines, 2 gearboxes, and 2 clutch housings in just 6 months. It spent 114 out of 165 days in the shop. Ouch. It wasn't engineering. It wasn't the design. It was execution. And the factory couldn't keep up with the car's potential. By 1977, production came to a quiet end. The final P6, a 3500S registered as VVC 700S, rolled off the line after nearly 14 years of manufacturing brilliance and breakdowns. And just like that, it was over. No swan song, no glory, just a brilliant idea slowly drowned in mismanagement. But even as the assembly line shut down, the story of the P6 wasn't finished, because cars like this, they never really go away. They resurface. And what the P6 left behind changed the game. When the dust settled, over 322,000 Rover P6s had been built. Not bad for a car that started as a moonshot idea on a blank sheet of paper. But the real impact, that came after production ended. The P6 became a quiet legend, a cult classic for people who knew what they were looking at. Its safety-first design helped inspire future crash protection standards. Its Didion suspension and modular body gave engineers something to think about for decades. Even the engine bay, originally meant for a turbine, became a symbol of how far Rover was willing to dream. You'd see them in old British police dramas. You'd spot one in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy or Jack Irish. Even Princess Grace of Monaco had one. Tragically, it was the car she was driving during her fatal accident in 1982. And if you've ever seen the Rover chair by Ron Arad, yeah, that's made from P6 seats. Today, surviving models are treasured by collectors, not because they're perfect, but because they're proof that British engineering, when it dares to innovate, can leave a lasting legacy. The Rover P6 never exploded onto the scene. It was too smart for that. But speaking of explosions, wait till you hear what Ford did with the Pinto. Hit the bell to uncover one of the most dangerous design decisions in car history.